Good morning. My name is Bashir Tamer. I am Director Executive of the Academy of the Kingdom of Morocco. Good morning, Professor Aziz Ismail, Professor Abdou Filali Ansari, and colleagues Coach Professor Fouad Ben Ahmed, Abdelrahim Al-Qarfa, and Yunus Yasni. Dear doctorants from Moroccan universities, first of all, behalf on the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Abdel Jalil Al-Hajmri, the Academy of the Kingdom of Morocco conveys its greetings to the Professor Aziz Ismail and you too for agreeing to participate in this seminar. One of the series of seminars, like you know, organizing on the theme Muslim Reformism, coordinated and supervised by Professor Mohammed Saghir Janjar. The title of today's is Islamic Reformism, Emergence and Dissemination of New Relations with the Past and the Islamic Heritage. Before giving the floor to the Professor Filali Ansari, whom I also warmly thanks, allow me in a few words to present Professor Aziz Ismail, whose educational background and interests spans cross literature, philosophy, religion, and psychology, has taught and conducted research at various universities and institutions, including the University of Nairobi, the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago, and the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard. He now lives in London, where at present he is one of the governors of the Institute of Ismaili Studies. Before his opening conference, I give the floor to the Filali Ansari, and thank you again.
Assalamu alaikum. Sabah al-khair. It is my great pleasure to open this session on behalf of Mohammed Saghir Janjar, because the series that I had coordinated has been, if I can say, finished. We reached the stage where we published a number of books out of this series, and it is this new series, which is directed by Mohammed Saghir Janjar, which has already begun, and of which Dr. Ismail is taking part. Well, today, as we all know, as we have all noticed, I think here in Morocco, it's back to school day, Dukhul al-Madrasi. We have seen all the agitation and so on around us, but here we won't have any agitation. We'll have our own, if I can say, back to school, and with a very distinguished master, if I can say. Because Dr. Aziz Ismail is someone whom I have known since 3 decades nearly, 3 decades, during which we had regular exchanges of views, of discussions, and so on. And he impressed me all the time by the clarity of the mind, by the rigor of the thinking, and by the interest in creative ways of looking at things. He has begun by working on the poetics of religious experience. He has had sometime a long way with Shakespeare, with writings of Shakespeare, of which he is one of the main experts, before coming at the end to psychology and to philosophy of psychology and so on. Well, this is a very brief summary, just out of my mind. And let me say this. He had also some institutional work, which was very important. He was the founding dean of the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London, an institute which has become a hub, if I can say, of all intellectual or modern researchers on Islam and Muslim traditions, the likes of Muhammad Arkoun, of Wilfred Madlung, all the great, of Van Es and so on, all the great names, if I can say, of modern studies of Muslim traditions had their contribution to this institute under the leadership of Dr. Ismail. So this is for me a great day and opportunity, not only because it's back to school for me as well, as I feel about it, but it's a great day because I know of the qualities of this, the one who I'm describing as a distinguished master, and without any further ado, I'll give him the floor immediately. Thank you.
So I pressed the green button and a red light came on. This is, but you can hear me. Yes. All right, so I will ignore the logical problem here between the green and the red. I'm very, very grateful. I'm very happy, first of all, to be here. I've noticed a difference in my experience of teaching between, on one hand, students in the developing world, in places like Nairobi, where I first taught, where I started my career, and also to communities to whom I have taught, like the Ismaili community that was mentioned. On one hand, the difference between speaking and teaching to these groups and teaching to American students, because I used to teach in America and in the West. And that is that while there are very, very clever and intelligent students, no doubt, in Western universities, without question, their studies in the humanities are academic. There is no strong emotional relationship between what they study in philosophy or history or psychology or whatever it is, and the ethos of their countries, the issues in their countries. There is a certain gulf, there's a certain gap. They tend to study the humanities in a way that they would, somewhat in a way, in which they would study the sciences, natural sciences. So, you can be a very good student in chemistry, but between, let's say, hydrogen peroxide and yourself, there isn't that bond. I'm using a chemical word, bond now, but in a metaphorical, humanistic way, that there is between religious issues here, for example, and the society. So I always enjoy speaking to groups like this. I'm very grateful to Professor Phil Ali Ansari for his introduction and his very kind comments. I've known him for a long time, and I admire his mind and his gentleness very, very greatly. It's always been both intellectually and spiritually inspiring to me to have been in his companionship and to have had him as a friend for so many years. So thank you very much for that. All right, I will now just begin my talk. But I want to say, first of all, well, one small thing I want to say is that during these talks, the week, we will be looking at certain readings. So there is a a small reading. Well, I'll tell you later about what those readings are, but they will be circulated to you. I think today we will just have time to look at one of these, and I'll go through them with you. You don't have to read them in advance. But if you have time for the subsequent sessions tomorrow and so on during the week, please have a look at those readings. They may not be immediately, they may not immediately make sense to you as to how they connect with what we are talking about. But don't worry about that. During the talks, I will try to make those connections. All right, is that clear enough? Is my speech, my English, because I'm sorry, I could, you know, I would have liked to speak in French. I mean, I read French, but I really can't speak it, so I don't want to attempt. You see, I think we have to be good to languages. We must not murder them. And if I tried to speak French, I would murder it. So this is the reason I'm speaking in English. It's not due to Brexit, incidentally. It is just my limitation. All right. My talks are going to be not on Islah so much, on the reform directly, but on the philosophical issues that are raised by the idea of reform. You see, because I'm speaking as a philosopher, not as a religionist. And certainly I'm not speaking as a preacher. That should be obvious to you. So I'm speaking as a philosopher. Now, philosophy deals with questions. And so the big part of our discussions this week will be raising questions. Now, there are, I think, three types of people generally in the world to do with questions. There are people who have questions and who have answers. There are people who have questions and no answers. Usually they say rabbis are like that. Rabbis in the Jewish community have a lot of questions, but they don't have answers. And then there are people who have no questions, but they have answers. And there are many like that around us. You know, many ulama and preachers have lots of answers, but they don't have questions. Now, I've made, I know while I'm saying this, I've made I have been a little illogical already. Because when I say that people have answers but no questions, then there can't be answers, you see, because the meaning of an answer is always that it is in response to a question. So when I say that people have only answers but no questions, I am being illogical. So let me correct myself. Those people who only have answers and no questions are actually people who have answers to potential questions. You see, they have answers ready-made, even without any questions are raised. So this is just my preamble. And it is something that let's just go on to the issues now. So this phenomenon, which is what it is, of Islah, you know, reform, it is not itself a philosophical position, but it requires, it arouses philosophical questions. And my position is going to be, and we can discuss this, is that the weakness of the idea of reform is because it does not confront the philosophical questions which it arouses. Inside Islam, there are philosophical questions which have to be brought out in the open. Now, I'm not blaming them. I'm not criticizing them. This is just a diagnosis, like a doctor's diagnosis of what is happening. Why this is happening, we will see. Why do they not confront philosophical questions? I will look later at some examples of reform, like Ali Abdul Razik and Fazlur Rahman. And we will see the absence of philosophical questions accounts for a certain weakness in their thinking, although there were thinkers in their own right. So I only want to use this question of reform as a starting point, as a point of departure to come to the philosophical questions, step by step by step. So let me give you some examples of philosophical questions that arise from the issue of reform. One example is, when you think of legal or moral principles, legal or moral norms, are they facts or are they the product of a command or a will? Are they forms of knowledge or are they expressions of will? Now, this is a very general philosophical question. It's not just about Islamic law. It can arise about any kind of law, Western, Eastern, Islamic, whatever. So, you see, what is the difference between knowledge and will? Knowledge is generally expressed in our language in the form of propositions of fact. That's the test. That is the litmus test. If you want to know whether knowledge is involved here or not, you look at the kind of language we use, the form of language we use, and the form of language in which propositions of fact are expressed. The kind of language in which knowledge is expressed is the form of language which consists of propositions of fact. What is a proposition of fact? Just now, it's 5 minutes to 10 or something. That is a proposition of fact. This room is, I was going to say, this room is a pretty room, is a nice room. That is not a proposition of fact, right? Because the word nice, what is it? You see now, that's also a philosophical question. What kind of a word is nice? You see, pardon? Well, not quite. You see, the opinion is, if we think of opinion as a belief, it is on the half station to knowledge. So for example, if I say that this liquid here looks like sulfuric acid, so it's perhaps sulfuric acid, I hope not. But if I say it is probably sulfuric acid, that's an opinion, you see, because I have not tested it. So that's a belief, that is an opinion. But if I put a litmus paper in it and it turns blue instead of red, then I say, no, this can't be an acid, it is an alkali. So there the opinion has turned into knowledge. But when I say something is nice or something is beautiful or something is good. Now, you see, I don't want to hurry about this because we will come to this question. Good. Because between the older view, that is of Plato, Aristotle, and the other philosophers, the Islamic philosophers, Farabi, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, between those philosophers and a large part of modern philosophy, there is a big divide between on questions of good. What does good mean? Because in the older tradition, the notion was that good is a quality, it's an objective fact. Nowadays, there is a tendency to say, when you say something is good, it is a judgment of a value. But you see, this is a controversial issue, and we mustn't just go with it. This division between fact and value is controversial. We have to look at it critically. All right, but that's I'm putting it on one side. So, unlike propositions of fact, the way that so you're being circulated one page now, but please don't look at it, don't read it now, because we will come to it. And if you miss what I'm saying now, then we won't be able to concentrate on it later. So please put it aside, because we will read it together, all right? Because we are not yet ready for it to read that. So do, put it aside. I will read it with you when we come later in this lecture. So, unlike propositions of fact, expressions of will are conveyed in commands, in orders, in commands. So if I say, shut the door, you see, that is a command. And it's not a proposition of fact. If I say two molecules, two atoms of hydrogen and one atom of oxygen make up one molecule of water, it's a proposition of fact. The thing about propositions of fact is that they can be true or false, true or untrue. Two atoms of, if I say two atoms of hydrogen and one atom of oxygen make up a molecule of water, I have made a true statement. If I say that two atoms of oxygen and one atom of hydrogen make up a molecule of water, I have also expressed a proposition of supposed fact, but it is false. But if I say shut the door, it's neither true nor false. So if law is an expression of a will, then there is no truth or falsehood in it. It is just a command. So, what makes a law good or bad? If it has nothing to do with truth. All right, so that is one question that I've raised, which we should come back, and maybe you should discuss this. If it is just a command, then there is no relationship to truth. If there is no relationship to the truth, then does the criterion of good or bad apply to law? If they don't, then any law is binding just because it is a law. You see, when the Nuremberg trials took place, after the Second World War. This was a claim that was made by the defendants, the Nazi defendants. You see? They said, everything we did, Holocaust, etc., the Second World War, was according to the law. Because the Führer, Hitler, said, do this, and we did it. Because it was a command. And we followed the command. Now you, Americans and British and French people are now telling me that we did things which were wrong, but that is now because you are now telling us that it is wrong. But right and wrong are only matters of obedience to command. So that your idea doesn't, you see, your law doesn't apply. Because it was the Nazi law which we followed, and we were law-abiding. We followed the law like good citizens. Now it's a very powerful, it is a, I shouldn't say powerful, but it is a logical argument. And this is why there was a legal philosopher in America called Ron Fuller, who actually went back to Aristotle. And he said, we have to reconsider how we think of law. Because if law is just a command, then we can't blame these people. And so he went back to what in the Islamic and the Christian and the Judaic civilizations was known as natural law. And natural law part of it goes back to Aristotle as well, which is where law is not just a command. But I don't want to, diverge too much. But that's an issue. So if Islamic law now, they will say, well, it is a command, but it is a command of God. Well, but if it is a command of God, then what is the difference between a command of God and a command of a human being? Because we are talking about will in both cases. So is the difference between a human will and divine will like the difference between my will and Professor Filali Ansari's will? Well, logically, yes, it's the same difference. But the difference may be in degree of knowledge. So Professor Filali Ansari would know things that I don't know. I know less than he does. But then how does that connect with the will? So if you say God's command is supreme because God knows everything and we don't know everything, then what is the connection between knowledge and the command? So I've raised some philosophical issues here. These are questions, no answers as yet. Maybe no answers ever. Maybe answers at Qiyamah. But maybe we can prepare for Qiyamah by thinking a little more about it. So I will leave this at the moment here. Now, let's go back to this issue of Islam, the reformism. So what the idea, there are many different kinds of reformist thinking, but I will, for philosophical purposes, we just think of it as one. Because we are not doing a historical analysis, we're just doing a philosophical analysis. So let's take it as one. There is a reformist sentiment, reformist position. And there is, let us call it a fundamentalist position. Again, it's not a good word because there's a lot of confusion about what does it exactly mean. And many people who are called fundamentalists, they say we are not fundamentalists. But that presumes that they know what fundamentalism means. So perhaps the word itself is not clear. It's a confused word. But never mind. For philosophical purposes, you see, the trouble is that when we are doing philosophical analysis, we actually would be better off if we did not use words in some cases, not in all philosophy. But in some cases, if we just use X and Y, then we don't have the same problems as we do with these words. So let us just think of fundamentalism as F, as an X, just and forget about the confusion of the different kinds of meanings and the half meanings which are involved in it. So fundamentalist position, let us just describe it as this, that God has revealed comprehensive, clear, complete, and eternal guidance for all humanity. That's a position. And each word is important here. Comprehensive, which means nothing is missing. Everything has been accounted for. Clear means there is no ambiguity. You read the Quran and it's just like daylight, you see. It's completely clear. That's the claim. That it is eternal. That means that it is valid for all times. And for all humanity. Doesn't apply to some. People cannot make exceptions in it. Now, the reformist movement, I have to, what's the time? You want me to speak for about an hour?
You still have time. You still have half an hour.
Okay, all right, half an hour, yes. Okay, so reformists see that there are certain elements which are values of modern life which clash, which are not accounted for in the Sharia laid down by the Quran. This is the reformist view. Now, for example, the status of women. You know this, I don't need to go into details about this, but you know the kinds of issues there are. The status of women, the practice of slavery, the issue of a government, can it be democratically elected or not? Is a constitutional government. What is the constitution? Is it the Sharia? Is that the ideal constitution? Or is it a constitution that we can devise democratically today? These are the sort of had punishments especially that are in the Sharia. Now, reformists want to somehow to make room for changes in these things. But the reformist has no answer to the fundamentalist challenge that this is what God says, and it is there, you see, it's very clear. What right do you have to change? And you see, reformists ultimately do not have a convincing answer. This is a philosophical deficit. A philosophy, now, first of all, why make changes at all? It doesn't help to say that because we live in a modern world, and in the modern world, we must have modern values, but that doesn't mean doesn't mean anything. Because to say it is modern means that it is today's thinking and not yesterday's. Well, there is no logical reason, and there is no empirical reason either, that what is considered to be good today is better than what was considered to be good yesterday. Not logical nor empirical. I'll tell you what I mean by not logical and not empirical. Logical means the meaning of today doesn't contain any idea about it being good. If I'm wearing a blue tie today and if I wore a red tie yesterday, it doesn't mean that a blue tie is better than a red tie. So there is no logical meaning. Logically, there is no meaning, there is no place for goodness in the idea of today as opposed to yesterday. But even empirically, practically speaking, supposing you think of Nazi Germany, at that time it was today, you see. When they were living there, it was modern. And the Nazi Germany had been preceded by Weimar Republic, which was a democratic republic, but that was yesterday. So if today was always better than yesterday, then you could have argued Nazism was better than the Weimar Republic because that was yesterday. So even empirically, you cannot claim that what happens today or what prevails today is better than what prevailed yesterday. So the fundamentalist challenge is very strong. And I really do think that, when we have our own judgments, our own positions. We like fundamentalism or we don't like it. We like reformism or we don't like it. And we have to put it all aside when we think philosophically. Because philosophically, inside you have to put yourself in the mouth of your opponent also. And your opponent in this case may be a fundamentalist, may be a reformist, or maybe somebody else. So we have to argue inside us there are different people sometimes. In actual life, there are different voices inside us always. And in philosophy, what we do is to activate different voices. So you cannot just run with one voice. Now, let me ask you a big question here. I think we will come to it on our fourth day. Is that, but in daily life, we cannot always be debating inside our mind. That we just go with what we believe. That is how human beings act, you see. I mean, for example, David Hume. Hume was a well-known philosopher. And Hume says that as far as we know, the sun has always risen in the east and it has always set in the west. As far as we know and all humanity knows, the sun has always risen, on Earth that is, not on Mars, we don't know, but on Earth, the sun always has risen on the east and on the sets in the west. But there is no logical necessity about it. There is no logical rule that says that the sun must rise in the east. Because between the notion of the east and the sun, there is no logical relationship. So there is no must about it. So logically it is possible that the sun can rise from the west. Right? But the point is that in our daily life, we don't think like that. I can't get up in the morning and say, has the sun risen now in the east? Should I look in the east? Or should I look at the west? Because logically it is possible that it may rise in the west. So perhaps Christians, Muslims, Jews, etc., in their ordinary life they just believe. They cannot or do not. No, let's not just say cannot, because can is a complicated word. But they don't normally think about these philosophical questions. So then this big question is, what is the relationship of philosophy to life? Is there a relationship? Or is there not? I think this is a very important question, because all the philosophers from the beginning of the history of philosophy, starting with Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, then in the Islamic world, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, etc., Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas in Christianity, modern philosophers, Kant, Hegel, Wittgenstein, particularly Wittgenstein, they've all raised these questions about the relationship. Hegel, very much. The relationship of philosophy to ordinary practice. And I think this is very important in the Islamic context as well. So it's a question, I'm leaving it as a question. Now, let me just proceed further. So this fundamentalist challenge to the reformists. You know what? There is an answer that the reformists gave, because one of the subcategory of the fundamentalist challenge is this, that as I said, the norms are all given in the divine law. These other norms are modern, the idea equality of men and women and etc., are all modern. And in fact, you see, nowadays people say not only are they modern, but they are also Western. And that makes the issue more emotional for people. It makes it more emotional because historically the West was a dominant power in, over the rest of the world. And also today, you can say the West is still not directly in the colonial sense, but in other ways, it's still dominant in many ways. But I think, we should really forget this issue, because it is a historical contingent. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not philosophically important, you see. It just happens that the West has this power. But it becomes part of the challenge, and namely, they say that, you see, what the fundamentalists say is that you reformists are actually just Western people. You love the West, and so that's why you want to you call them modern, because modern doesn't mean Western, you see. Modern only means today's as opposed to yesterday's. That also, there is straight away a problem there, as you saw. But particularly if the modern is the same as Western, mind you, there are two possibilities here. Are these values modern and Western, or are they values which are modern because they are Western? Because you see, you can have an idea, something can be modern, which in the Islamic world, which coincides with a value in the Western world. That's a coincidence. They don't have to be modern in the Islamic world because they are modern in the Western world. See, there is no necessity that makes this modernity Western. Because it may happen that you independently come to a conclusion in one part of the world which is the same as the conclusion in another part of the world. But you have not actually derived that conclusion in one part of the world from that conclusion in the other part of the world. So that's a question also that is open. But you say this political issue, supposing the reformists are preaching these values because they are influenced by the West, see, the reformists have an answer. And it is a very common answer, which is, no, these values are not Western. All these values are Quranic. In fact, all these values were there long before the West discovered them. They were in the Quran, they are already in the Quran, and the West only discovered that much later, but the Muslims knew it long before. See, Mona Siddiqui is a lecturer in Islamic studies in England. On the radio once she said, the interviewer asked her about women's position, that, what do you say about this issue of women in Islam? And she said, oh, there's no problem at all. It's a misunderstanding. Because the women were all liberated in the time of the Quran. In fact, they were more free than Western women are today. Now, this is a very problematic, I'm being kind now, and I'm using the word problematic, but it is a very problematic position. Because if you want to read, let us say, nuclear fission, if you want to read genetics in the Quran, if you want to read, atomic physics, subatomic physics now, you can always do it if you want. You can just say this word means this one, even in the Muhammad Abdu tradition, you see, people said that when the Quran talks about jinn, it is talking about bacteria. But this can be arbitrary. I mean, how do you make these decisions? It's completely arbitrary. So this is not something that we can actually will stay. So I want to say now that the modernist, the reformist, is in a very unstable position. He wants change, he wants progress, what he thinks is change or progress. He somehow feels, not thinks, but feels that the equality of men and women is a good position to have. The reformist feels that the had punishments can be too severe. The reformist feels that a democratic constitutional government is better than authoritarian government, etc. Why do I say it feels? Because now, perhaps there is some reason there. But the reason is below the surface. It has not been brought out. It has not been articulated. Once you articulate it, the problems begin again. It is not the end of the problem. Because once you articulate it, imagine a fundamentalist, and you reason this, you say that these values are rational. Imagine the fundamentalist challenge. It's very easy for the fundamentalist. He will say, whose reason? Yours or God's? how do you then, where do you go from there? You see, these are what the reformist has not done is he has not made things difficult enough for himself. You see, we have to make things difficult first if we are going to be intellectually and philosophically reasonable. Now, you could ask me one question. Let me just deal with this question now. Why reason at all? What is the importance of reason, and why philosophize? Because philosophy is a form of reasoning. Not all forms of reasoning are philosophical, but philosophy is a form of reasoning. Why philosophize? Why reason at all? Well, now that sometimes there is an Aristotelian answer to this. And what is the Aristotelian answer? The Aristotelian answer is that human beings are rational by nature, that it defines a human being. Just as an elephant without a trunk is not an elephant, just as an animal without legs is not an animal but a reptile. You see, a crocodile or a snake who has no legs is not an animal but is a reptile. So a human being without reasoning is not human. That is the Aristotelian position. Is it also the Islamic position? Or is it compatible with the Islamic position? These are two different questions. Is it an Islamic position, or is it compatible with Islamic positions? Let's take just the first. Is it an Islamic position? Well, if it is, then we have to think about, again, about the meaning of God, about what does it mean for God. What does God mean? What does the meaning of being human mean? And is the revelation God's will, or is it a kind of reasoning? You see, these are issues that we have to then tackle. Before I end, let's just go through the, should we end or? Okay, so let me just make, let me come back to Ali Abdul Razik, right? This is a book that Professor Philali Ansari, among many of his books, this is a book that he translated. And it's an excellent translation. And you should, if you are interested, if you have not read it, look at it. If you want to read it in English translation, but obviously you can read it in Arabic. But if you wanted to read it in English translation, I think it is on the internet. It's as a PDF, it's available. Ali Abdul Razik, you say, in the 19th century was concerned with this at Al-Azhar, where he was a alim, he was a teacher. And he was writing at the time, in fact, in the 20th century, the question of the Khilafah, the Caliphate. Mustafa Kemal, you see, because in Turkey, this issue came up because the Ottoman Khilafah was abolished. And so there was a controversy about this in the Muslim world. You must know this historically, because the issue of that how essential was the caliphate to Islamic law. And Ali Abdul Razik makes this claim in his book, for which he got into a lot of trouble afterwards. he said that the caliphate has no base, is not an Islamic notion, because it has no basis in the Quran at all. So he went through the Quran and he says nowhere in the Quran is there any mention, direct or indirect, of the caliphate. Also, in the Sharia, there was never an ijma, there was never a complete consensus about the essential nature of the caliphate in Islam. So, and also further, as a matter of historical fact, the caliphate led to many disasters because of the wars and the oppression and so on and so forth. So for all these reasons, there is no need for any Islamic government or Islamic caliphate at all. Now, and as I said, this led to a lot of opposition, and he was, the issue I want to, he was stigmatized. Now the issue I want to raise here is, you see, Abdul Razik is looking for a vindication or otherwise of the principle of the caliphate in the Quran. But the Quran was revealed before any question of the Khilafah ever arose, because the issue of Khilafah postdates the revelation of the Quran. So, what is implied by this act of reading the Quran in order to find a position on the Khilafah? Which is the same issue as today, for example, if I want to know whether a transplantation of a bodily organ is halal or haram, because nowadays you can transplant organs. Or if somebody is completely a vegetable, meaning he's in a hospital in a condition where he's not just physically disabled, but also mentally totally unconscious, then can you switch off the machine and let the person die or not? These are issues. So if you look at the Quran to find out whether this is allowed or not, then there is a hidden premise there. And the hidden premise is that it must all be there in the Quran, which is a premise that Abdul Razik has just unconsciously adopted. You see, because he doesn't discuss it. He doesn't say, I am taking this premise that everything is in that if the Khilafat is legitimate, the Quran must say that it is legitimate. If the Quran doesn't say it is legitimate, it is because the Quran doesn't intend the Caliphate to be established. That's not a premise he states, because that part of his mind is just a given. He doesn't, not only does he not question it, he doesn't confront it, you see. To confront it means, first of all, even to say that this is my premise, that I'm acting on it. This is not historically incomprehensible. I'm not saying you can't understand why, but philosophically we must ask, what do we think about this premise? And please understand, I'm not saying anything for or against this. I am simply bringing these issues to the surface. Because my opinion on this is valueless. It has no value, because that would be just my opinion. And your opinion and my opinions may be the same, or they may differ. But, you know, a lot of discussions, even in the academic world, are just opinions. I think like this, you think like this, and then that people agree, that people disagree, people fight. But there is no point to it. So I don't want to stop with opinions. I want to just bring this premise out. So in fact, you see, what is missing, I shouldn't say missing because that's a value judgment. What is absent is a better word than missing. In Abdul Razik, what is absent is history, in this sense, that certain ideas occur only at certain times. Point number one. So the caliphate is an idea that could not have occurred in the time of the Prophet. It could only have occurred after the Prophet. That's a historical, that's a premise about the occurrence of ideas. Now you can go beyond occurrence of ideas, and you can say ideas are right or wrong only according to the history, according to their time. That's different, because in the first case we are saying ideas can exist only in a certain time and not in another time. But in the other, more than that, you could say ideas can be right or wrong only in accordance with their time. That is a postmodern, contemporary position, which here now, let me contradict myself. I said my opinion is valueless, but on this, let me give you my opinion as a shortcut. This postmodern point of view, meaning, anything is right or wrong only according to that culture and according to that time. This destroys all reasoning. Because if something is right only according to my culture and according to my time, then what is the meaning of right? If something is true only according to my culture or my time, then what is the meaning of truth? I had, many years ago, I was talking to a French friend of mine in Paris, and I said something, I don't remember what the discussion was, and he said to me, but that is your truth. That's not everyone's truth. And I said, how can you be stupid? Because, because he's a friend, I could talk to him like that, you see. And so how can you be so stupid? What you mean to say is that this is what I think is true, but you can't say my truth, because truth is not mine or yours. If I say 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen make up a molecule of water, it's not my truth. It is the truth. And if I think that it is 2 atoms of oxygen and 1 atom of hydrogen, then this is what I think is true, but it is not the truth. I mean, I can have an opinion about the truth, but that doesn't make it true. My opinion may coincide with the truth, it may not coincide with the truth. But this is, you see, there is a problem in this surrounding postmodern thinking, which just destroys all notions of truth and all notions of reason. So I am contradicted myself because I said I'm not going to say, I'm just going to raise questions. But in this case, I have I've not just raised a question, but I have expressed an opinion which I think is the true opinion, you say. But you can challenge me if you like. Because my ideas are as fallible and can be as mistaken as anybody else's. So you can disagree with me, but don't disagree with me, but just saying that it is my truth. You see, disagree on the basis of objective reasoning. So just to finish, I wanted to do this, but there's no time for this. Fazlur Rahman went one step further than Ali Abdul Razik, because what he faced, what he confronted was the historical premise that ideas have a certain connection. I don't want to say more because it's not even clear what he thinks, what kind of connection it is. Is it completely relative or not? I mean, that's an issue. I don't think he thinks like that. But he actually confronted the issue of history that Ali Abdul Razik had not done. So he recognized that the time of the Quran is different from the time of today, and the world of the Quran is different from the world of today. And yet, he wanted, so we felt very strongly that in a Muslim community and in a Muslim nation, he was a Pakistani, the Quran should rule. That he was completely convinced about. But that the world of the Quran was historically different from the world of today. So how do we solve this? So I've given you a little reading where he tries to resolve this. Is that successful or is it not? That's what I wanted to discuss, but maybe we can take it up at the start of the next lecture.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ismail, for bringing our attention back to what was called the guillotine of David Hume, the distinction between facts and values. Facts can be described, can be what they are, and they can be objects of knowledge, while values are commands or options or feelings or whatever we would like. So this distinction has played an important role in the history of philosophy, and I'm grateful that we are going back to it in order to have a fresh discussion about it. Thank you also for this initial discussion of Ali Abdul Razik and Fadlur Rahman. Ali Abdul Razik, in fact, and I'll come to a quick defense of him for the moment. We can discuss it at length later. Ali Abdul Razik wanted to make this clear distinction between the time of the Prophet and what came after. For him, the time of the Prophet can be the time of laying down a number of values and so on. What came after was Muslims in history. They were attempting to settle differences between them, and the Caliphate was a kind of solution that they found at that time, which was more or less
Yes. The only thing I would say is that I agree with you. He was making a distinction, but what he was saying is what happens afterwards has to be judged by what was said before.
Okay, well, this is also
Because the Quran
Yes, yes.
and
This
the
also-
Prophet's teaching,
yes.
which came before what happened afterwards. Yeah. Sorry, but I don't.
It's okay.
Yes.
And for Fadl Rahman, I think he took it was a long chapter and very painful and difficult demonstration for him to show that even the hadith, which is not sure, can be adopted by Muslims as a kind of expansion of the idea of Islam. The idea has been worked by Muslims and so on, but these are matters which need maybe more time to be developed and to be studied for good. What I suggest now is that we take, as we used in the former sessions of the seminar, we take some time for discussions within groups. Then we come back here to this room and then, yes, we take a break now. Now or after the group discussion, whatever you would prefer, and then we come back after having put some order in our own thoughts about what has been submitted to us. Okay. So let's have the break now and discussion after, and then we come back to the room. Okay. Thank you very much.
I heard a lot about you from Professor.
Yes.